Good afternoon, Oscar. How are you?
Hey, Christian. Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Can you tell us in one sentence what Peak is and what Peak does?
Peak is a booking platform for tour operators. We help you with everything from online bookings to back office bookings, guide management, waivers, and everything you need to run your tour and activities business.
Excellent. And nextly, is that a word? Do you have any news to share with us this week?
Yeah, actually, we're really excited. We just closed our Series C with an $80 million investment from Westcap and Goldman Sachs. And it's really exciting because it allows us to, we have a best-in-class product, but it really allows us to double down on product, customer support, and a whole lot of other areas that we've been wanting to invest in and make the product better, make the offering better to operators. We have a lot of great ideas, and so it's great to have that growth investment at this point.
That's great news. That's great for you as Peak. It's also great for the industry. I think that people are still investing at this time. So just for those that don't understand this, so you've been through a few rounds of financing. Can you go through your previous fundraising and explain how that works as far as rounds?
Yeah, so we had initial seed round, obviously, when Ron and I started the business. You find a whole lot of individuals who just believe in the space that there's opportunity. And then over time, we've added, we went through Series A relatively early on, and then Series B, and added more key investors to the business. So now Series B, for example, was led by Cathay Pacific and, sorry, Cathay Investment. And they are a global venture firm that basically helps. For us, that's really important in terms of like thinking as a travel company, you don't want to be limited to the US. So whenever we talk to investors, we want to make sure we have investors that have strategic alignment and help us actually grow the business. So Cathay was really important for us at the time, helping us to get to the next step. And now Westcap, where they have a background in Airbnb, they invested in Hopper, they're very strong on the travel side. So we're bringing them in, and they're going to help us build the business with a lot of their travel expertise.
That's excellent. You know, at the start of the pandemic, when we all thought this was a 2-month shutdown, we all thought half the res techs were going to go out of business. I think only one that I know of has actually gone out of business. And then here we are, whatever we are now, 20 months later. It's a real sign of optimism, isn't it? When people are still confident in your product, that they'll throw that kind of money. I think it'll be the biggest res tech investment by quite a long way today.
Yeah, and I think it reflects two things. I think one, it shows that it's a very resilient industry. I think there's a lot of operators that had to weather a very, very harsh storm over the last year and a half. And they're still around, right? They're still making ends meet, and they're still driving the smaller cut down business, and they're bringing people back. Now they're starting to bring people back. So I think the industry in itself is resilient. And then for Peak, we obviously get hit hard. We had to make some hard decisions, but then really focusing on our operators and helping operators do better. We help with PPP loans. We build software that help them do contactless payments and things like that. That has helped us. By helping our operators, that has helped us weather the storm as well. And investors really believe in this industry. I think tours and activities is that new it's been up and coming for a while, but it's an up and coming area in travel that everybody's been excited about for a long time. And I think now coming out of the pandemic, where there's a lot of pent up demand, people are really excited to go traveling again. People want to do experiences, also local kayak rentals and so forth. I think there's a lot of excitement in that space, and that's reflected in this round.
And you guys are still very focused just on the US, I think, from what I've seen. So how much of this is luck that the US has been the best market, I think, clearly over the last year or 15 months?
It's been a little bit of luck and a little bit of sort of strategic thinking. So we do have international operators, even though like 90% is in the US, we do have international operators. But what really helped us is that we actually work with a lot of different operators. So your food tour in Rome or wherever like really struggled, but your local kayak rental place actually did really well during the pandemic. And so that having that diversity actually really balanced it out. So that has helped us.
So yeah, that local market's been a bit of a topic of conversation, hasn't it? We've got Klook talking about this sort of super app going horizontal into local markets. And do you see that as the way? Well, let's talk about the future. So first I want to go backwards. So how many employees did you have pre-COVID? How many do you have now? And then what do you see over the next year or two?
Pre-COVID, we had around 130, 140 maybe. And then during COVID, we were around 100. And then now we're at around 150.
Okay, so you're already above pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Excellent. And then where do you see that going now? You've got this this pile of money. Where do you see that going?
Product investment, to be honest. There's a lot of things that we want to do. It's actually really exciting. The Peek Pro product is very sophisticated and mature, but there's a lot more that we've been wanting to do that we've never had the resources to do. And that's some of it has to do with COVID related. So we talked about locals, for example. We have a really exciting memberships feature coming out so that you can actually have locals, basically, they can sign up for a membership, maybe they get charged repeated on a monthly basis, which also is monthly recurring revenue, which is something that operators haven't really had in that way. Right, so just to supplement revenue when times get tough. But it also allows you to work, for example, with corporate businesses, right? So a large company can say like, hey, we're gonna buy a corporate membership for $1,000 a month and all our employees can go sailing at a discount, right? So there's a lot that you can do with memberships. And that became really important during COVID because there's so much more focus on local. So we've been wanting to build that for a little while. Now we'll have the resources to do that. So we have a whole pipeline of wish listed things that for a long time we've been wanting to do that we really feel like are going to help operators a lot that we'll now actually be able to execute on.
Right, interesting. So the membership is what museums have been doing for a long time, right? But maybe that's just taking that and applying it to more companies now and opening up that.
And it's a complement of, it's not a replacement, but I think it's a opportunity, right? Even if you complement 10% of your revenue with memberships, that's something you can rely on, and you kind of, as an operator, diversifying where your revenue is coming from. So it's very, very powerful from that perspective.
So that's interesting. We're talking about subscriptions, which kind of gets into the frequency. I feel like the frequency of the transactions has been a big topic recently. You also mentioned your investors, Westcap, investors in Hopper, which they've talked about a lot, and obviously Airbnb. You've got links with now. How much does that become an influence? Do you then get to sort of utilize the resources that Hopper has? They're fairly recently funded. Maybe they don't have the resources, but do you strategize with these companies because you've got some?
Not yet. No, we haven't yet. It is very much because we're very much focused on our industry at this point. But it is something, right? Like part of the reason of bringing an investor in like that is that strategically we can start having conversations, right? Where do we want things to be a year from now? Where do we want it to be 2 years from now? So I think it's more long-term prospect. There's not like immediately like, oh, now we're going to change everything and change our roadmap and we're going to do all these new things. I think it's much more about executing on the roadmap we've been wanting to do for a while. But it is with some more experienced people who have been through the up and downs in the travel industry, helping us to navigate that and helping us to really think about not just what happens during COVID, at the end of COVID, but what happens the year or 2 years after COVID, right? How do we prepare for that? How do we think about that?
So when you raise that kind of money, I assume these investors want to get a return on this money?
I'm sure they do. But that is, again, that's sort of why you look for strategic investors, right? You look for investors who are not in it for a quick turnaround and say like, hey, you have to double within X amount of time and then I want my money back, right? You really want investors who believe that this industry is a massive opportunity, that there's a lot of players in that can go in that industry, that Peek is really set up well for it, and that that the ultimate goal of building a big business in this industry is something that it'll take as long as it takes. But that is the opportunity that Peek is set up for that. So we haven't gotten any timelines or anything like that on any sort of deliverables or anything like that.
But I think we can assume you gave them some projections on what this business can be. So based on whatever projections you gave them, is it a zero-sum game? Does this need you to take market share from FareHarbor and ResD and Boken and others? Or is there still plenty of extra market where it doesn't need to become a scrap and a race to the bottom, maybe on pricing? Or
I think it's a fundamental mindset question, right? Is like, do you have that abundance mindset or the scarcity mindset? I think the scarcity mindset says like, if I have something, then you can't have it. I'm much more an abundance person. I think for two reasons. I don't think that this industry is like if you say like, hey, if Peak took away from FareHarbor or the other competitors, it would imply that the market is relatively saturated with booking system and everybody has one. I don't think that's true. That's not what we're seeing. When we work with operators, we still have operators who work on homegrown systems and big operators, homegrown systems that they built 10, 20 years ago and that they want to update. Or they don't have any system. So we're still, I think there's still a massive greenfield opportunity that doesn't necessarily mean we're out competing directly with other booking systems. I also think this is despite the setbacks of COVID, this is a growing industry. More and more people will discover that actually they care about experiences. They want to offer experiences. They would like to be a tour operator of some sort, an experience provider, I think is a more modern term. But that's something they care about and want to do. And consumers still want to do these things, right? We will have an incredible pent-up demand after COVID, whenever that all of that dies down, of people basically having saved up for that trip to wherever. So I think the industry as a whole will grow, right? And Peak will grow with that. So I'm really excited about that.
Right. So as you want to expand the product, add more features, membership being one. What about geography? Is part of your plan now to scale into other geos, Europe or global, or where do you see that going?
It's an interesting question. Right now, we actually moved as a company remote first now. Because of the pandemic, we gave up our offices and we started hiring across the US and also in Latin America. So we actually have now a very decentralized team. And that raises the question also like, hey, should we start selling in certain regions, right? Now that we have more people in certain locales. We haven't made any specific goals or targets yet on where we want to go, if we or whether we want to go. I feel like the US is big enough. There's still so much to do there. Having said that, it's not out of the question either, right? Like when we feel strong about the product, I think it will require research, put it that way, right? I think you don't want to go in a market just because it's there. You need to understand that market. You need to connect to tour operators. And even in the US, we've learned that tour operators in New Orleans work very different from tour operators in Florida, work very different from tour operators in New York, right? So just coming in and saying like, hey, here's a new booking system and it's going to be great for you without understanding the market is hard. So we will continue to look at other markets, but right now we're still pretty firm in the US.
I think it's fascinating. You know, I've forgotten what your last round was, 20 something million. And I think people wondered, is that not enough to take over the world? And now you're raised 80 million and you're still questioning if you should go outside the US. I think it's great because it shows what a massive market that you believe the US is.
And it's not a question of whether you should go outside, it's more a question of when, right? I think the worst thing you can do is just go through and burn it all, like we've never been a company that burned through cash. We've always been incredibly fiscally responsible and very focused on doing what we do that well. So I think when we talk about international expansion, it is something that eventually will happen, right? You're a travel company, eventually you will want to go into other markets. It's really hey, is that the first thing we want to do right now? No, probably not. Right now, there's a lot of things that we think are really exciting to do in the US. But down the line, we will start looking at that.
So what are the expectations? You said all this stuff about not having expectations, but what happens next? Is the next thing a Series D? Can you go to IPO from here? What would be a good next step for you?
We'll see.
SPAC? A SPAC? Everyone does SPACs these days. Maybe that's too small for you.
That's a sexy thing to do. I don't. Right now, it's hiring, to be honest. We're growing the team really, really fast, and it means we have to rethink how we have the team structured, there's a lot of things that come with growth that we're focused on right now. And I think that's going to keep us pretty busy for the next 6 to 12 months. So it's very hard to say, hey, what comes after that? I do think, right, like we actually weren't aggressively looking to fundraise this summer. It's in the middle of the pandemic, and we were doing fine. It wasn't like hey, we need to fundraise to get through this. We were doing actually fairly well. It was more that the investors saw that, hey, there's an opportunity here. There's a company that's going through the pandemic and doing well. They can use that growth money, right? And we're like, okay, that's actually a great time for us because we can scale up now what we've been learning over the last few years. I think that'll happen with Series D whenever that happens, right? Is going to be a similar phase where we feel like, hey, we hit a new milestone. The company is at a stage where we feel like we can scale it up to the next level, whatever that looks like. So it's hard to predict sort of like, there's not really a rhythm to it to say like, hey, in next year, this year we do this, and next year we're going to raise another this, and then the year after we do that. I think it really depends on where the business is at. But it is nice to be in that
position. There's no rhythm, there's no plan. You didn't intend to raise, but someone just gave you $80 million. You may or may not go outside of the US. It all sounds pretty easy.
It's not easy. It's great because basically what this allows us to do is what we would have done anyway. It would have just taken way longer, right? That's sort of how it's an acceleration, which is what makes this exciting. I do think you need to have a plan. I do think any business weathering COVID has to be very, very careful about where they're spending their resources, and we've done that. So I would not say it was easy.
Right. So let's do a quick fire. Let's do a quick SWOT analysis. So really short answers to this. So I want to do strengths. First of all, you personally, and then Peek.
I think I'm good. Personally, it's always really braggy. I think I work really well with two operators and businesses. I love sitting in the back office and watching people use product and working how they run their operation and figure out how do we abstract that out and how can we help as a product. I think that DNA, and that was very key for me starting the company, is also very, very deeply founded within the whole Peek team, that we're very customer centric. We're very much focused on talking to our customer, understanding their needs. And it's not just building the right product, but it's also providing the right services, making sure customer support is always available when they need them to. And so I think that's a very strong culture value within the company, is to be that customer centric.
Right. So that's you, and then the company culture, you brought that into the company. So let's use that as Peek strength as well. So how about weaknesses? How about your personal weaknesses and then Peek as a company?
Should have prepared that one. You can cut this out.
We won't cut it out. We'll show that you had to think for a very long time before you could come up with a weakness.
So personally, I think sometimes it's easy to get a little bit too caught up in what product can do, and sometimes it's the easiest solution is actually something where sometimes it's easy to get caught up into in sort of, hey, I'm talking to operator X and they're really mad and they're really they need this one thing to really help them catch their business. And it's very easy to get caught up in that and not take a step back and say like, hey, is this the single most important thing? And I think that can be a weakness, because I think it's sort of the opposite of that strength is also that high level of empathy, right? And you need to kind of actually take a step back and say like, does it make sense both for the operator, but does it also make sense for Peek to do? And I think that's sort of, I would say actually sort of the biggest strength is also the biggest weakness, is because you get, you sometimes, and it forces you sometimes to make hard decisions that you shouldn't even be that hard, if that makes sense.
So your weakness potentially listening to the customer too much and maybe building things that you shouldn't be?
Or getting tempted to, yes.
Tempted. And is that the same weakness then for Peek?
Well, again, I think as a founder, you set the tone for the company, and I do think that can be. I'm fortunate enough to have Ruzwana as a counterpart, and we balance each other, and so she keeps us in check. But it is definitely it's always a risk, put it that way.
Do you think a historic weakness has been sales versus your largest competitor? Let's say Fair Harbor.
Love the leading question. Yes, I think historically that is definitely the case, right? We've always been a product-led company, and really focus on building a great product. I think it took us a very long time to actually communicate that to customers. And sales, I have a lot of respect for the sales team. Trying to connect to somebody on the phone in the first 5 seconds of them picking up so that they even just listen to you, that you might have something that might be interesting and valuable to them, is very, very hard.
Right.
And we have historically not been good at that. I think Verhaber has been much better at that.
Okay, let's go quickly on, I think we may have already covered this, but biggest opportunity, this is for Peek as a company?
I think continue to invest into the space. I think that's really just, there's so many more, there's some more verticals, there are, and there's more operators. I think just expanding on all of those.
And the biggest threat?
I think if the pandemic hangs on longer, everything will slow down. I think that's threat number one. I think the second threat that I worry about is, right, we're growing very quickly right now. That always creates internal frictions. And so I think we need to be extra vigilant on our execution and making sure we don't drop balls, we don't forget to call back, right? Like all of those little things. Yeah, I think it's an execution. Like, can you scale up and do that well?
Right. We're going to finish with some quick fire questions. This is for you personally. So first of all, I want to hear the top 3 countries that you visited.
Korea, Mongolia, and Argentina.
Top 3 countries you'd like to visit that you haven't been to yet.
Brazil, Morocco, and Sweden.
Sweden, okay. You haven't been to Sweden? You're German.
I've not been to Sweden. I know, it's crazy.
It's right
Been
there.
to Norway, but I've not been to Sweden.
Right. And a business leader that you admire or follow?
I think Bill Gates has always been a hero. I think that's,
okay.
Yeah.
And a company that you admire or follow?
Actually, it's funny, not for the longest time, but Microsoft is having a real comeback, and it's been fascinating to see how much the culture has recently changed and how well they have reoriented themselves to adapt. I've been really, really impressed with that.
Yeah, a lot of days it's the biggest company in the world, I think.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah, they beat Apple recently at some point.
Yeah. And finally, what's one piece of advice you'd give to your 22-year-old self?
Don't code as much and look around a little bit more. I was very nerdy.
Right. Excellent. Well, thanks for coming on, Oskar. Really appreciate it. Great to see you as always, and hope to see you someplace soon in real life.
Thank you. Same here.
Thanks.